All right, we're right back. We're back. It's after Memorial Day weekend. Jennifer, someone to your right there, got a special guest today, Clint
Yeah.
Walker. He's with the appraiser pool, guest of yours.
Yep.
Um,
He's a fellow agent at Benchmark, but he does appraisals and he is a great person to know. I've called him more than a few times when I had questions.
Outstanding. Let's all tell everybody what we did over our weekend, over Memorial Day weekend. So I'll start.
Okay.
I'm still sick. I'm still sick with this damn eye
Oh,
issue. Now I've got my first. I've never had a sinus infection before. Wonderful.
you living
So
the life.
10 days. Oh, that's right. I wasn't here for the pod. Yeah, I was last week.
Tennessee
Um,
life.
yeah, living the life. We had a great. I smoked on meat. I
You
smoked
can't
meat.
say that. Okay. I was going to say, you can't say that here.
I smoked some meat on Memorial Day. On Sunday, I do it for the race, all the races. I watched the Grand Prix of Monaco and then Indianapolis 500. And then the 600, I smoked a brisket, I smoked chicken, and I smoked ribs. And 2 out of 3 were successes. One, the most expensive, was a complete failure. That's right, it was the brisket.
Oh, no.
So back to the drawing board on that again. And then I just looked at the rain all day Monday and was disgusted with my messed up brisket. How about y'all?
Wait, hold on. Have you done brisket successfully in the past?
Yes.
Dr.
That has been the coldest spring. It actually is the first time I smoked meat. The first time we really did anything outside this year.
Yeah.
It's just been, we've had just in the month of May in Nashville, we've had 8.3 inches of rain.
Most rain since 2010, the year of the flood.
Yeah, and it's the first time since 2013. So, Clint, you're going to love this. We love spouting all these figures and stuff.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah.
And we don't have it written down. We just remember. But let me tell you what, with that 8.3 inches, it's also this is the first May since 2011 that we haven't gotten above 90 degrees. So try that on.
And what about our interest rates? Is this the first?
Oh! Interest rates did dip this week below 7.
They're dropped? They're bottomed out? We should all refinance?
They dropped. Everyone get on your phone now.
Yeah,
so they dropped. They're beautiful. They're at the negatives.
6.97.
It's a big, beautiful interest rate drop. We're not
the biggest drop in 4 hours.
Oh my God.
Yep.
So we had folks down to the lake, and the guys went out trout fishing, did well, caught a bunch, catch and release. We went to Nearest Green Distillery. We were there on Saturday. And so for those of you who know me, I had a altercation with Jack when I was younger than I should have even known him. And I don't care for him or his cousins or anybody else, but Nearest I can actually sip a little bit of. Very good. And they do a tribute to the military at 1856 daily. So like 1,856 hours. So we were there and I did a quick recording of that. And then we played Cards Against Humanity, and that was riotous. And then we, watched the rain and did the things. So what about you, Clint? What did you get into?
Fun fact, Nearest Green is who taught Jack Daniels what the hell he was doing.
That's right.
Yep.
And so maybe you got the good stuff. Maybe you didn't get the counterfeit, and that's why it was okay for you. Maybe Jack Daniels is counterfeit. We'll
do one more fun fact. Do you guys know why the phrase "the real McCoy" exists?
No.
So when they were during Prohibition and they were smuggling into Savannah, particularly, there was an Irishman named McCoy, and he did not dilute his spirits the way a lot of the Italian bootleggers did. And so people began to ask for the real McCoy.
Do you have the real McCoy here?
Yeah. I'll give you one more fun fact as a whiskey enthusiast. So Jennifer, you may, since you've been avoiding Jack, you may not notice, but Jack Daniels has this little bit of banana undertone to it.
Oh, I hate bananas.
Yeah, well, it's a flavor that's in Jack Daniels, and that comes from the yeast, which is the same strain of yeast they have been using for hundreds of years.
Okay.
Ever since, or whenever he started the still back in the day. Same little if you make
he came to work in 1856. That's why that one bottle
Yeah.
with Nearest is called 1856. And then 1884, I think, is when Nearest retired from the business. But one of Nearest's relatives is still continuously to this day working at Jack.
That's awesome.
Yep. So
Really
that's amazing. Yep. What'd you do this weekend?
Well, I guess I'm lame. I worked most of the weekend. I've only got one listing right now, and my listing wasn't so busy, but all my agent friends must have been busy because they were all calling and texting with questions all weekend.
Yeah.
And but we did get out and we did a little light hiking on Saturday, I think, and Sunday we went to the Skirmerhorn to see Guerrero's finale.
Oh yeah,
because he's retiring, and Monday was actually pretty low key. Most everybody took the day off, and my phone didn't ring too much on Monday.
Nice. Where'd you hike?
Where did we go? Cedars of Lebanon.
Okay. We actually did a small hike around the campground at Tim's Ford, the White Trail. I'll probably start doing more little tidbits now that we're getting into really what people consider hiking season about hikes that we do. And then Skirmerhorn, did you know, and we tried to get tickets, but they're sold out. They're doing a Bugs Bunny or Looney Tunes thing.
Oh.
We my granddaughter's going to be in town, and we're like, we wanted to go because we saw the Tom Petty thing.
Yeah.
We couldn't get in. So anyway, well, we wanted to talk about for what it's worth. What's my house worth? What's my house worth? That's what everybody's always asking me. And, I'm sure you say this to your clients too. Your house is worth whatever somebody is willing to pay for it.
Yeah.
But when I'm talking, especially to first-time buyers, I kind of give them what I call the Sesame Street breakdown. And that's like, you're going to go to Lance and you're going to ask to borrow. We're going to use history major numbers here, okay? You're going to ask to borrow $300,000. And Lance is going to go, okay, are you going to pay me back this amount of money? Do your debt to income ratio, do you have the ability to give me this amount of money back monthly so that it's paid off in a reasonable time? And then he's going to look at your credit score, which they use to determine when Jennifer has money, does she have a willingness to pay it back? Not about does she have it, but does she have a willingness to pay back? And then they're going to get a third-party person, the appraiser, in to say, not influenced by Lance, not influenced by the buyer or the seller's agent or the buyer or the seller themselves, is this house worth $300,000 in case something happens and the bank has to recoup their money somehow? That's like the child version of it. What is your kind of scenario? Is there corrections on any of those statements I made about not?
I've got to interject and then pass it to Clint. Jennifer, I'm very impressed. What a great student of the trade you are. Ability. Where's my thumb? Where is it? I'll just say it. Number 1, ability. Number 2, willingness. And number 3 is where Clint comes in. Is it worth it? That's the collateral. Take it away, Clint.
Yeah, I think for a lot of buyers, one of the professional dynamic that Jennifer just described, one of the points of sometimes consternation. Before I was an appraiser, I had to fumble through an explanation of this for one of my own buyers who really got bent out of shape about it. But one of the things that people don't quite understand is that the appraiser is there working for the lender, and the lender is our client. Now, the buyer's paying the bill, unless there's some special arrangement, but we're there working for the lender. So, the buyer, at least my buyer back when I had this terrible explanation back before I was an appraiser, he wanted to know, well, why is the appraiser always just appraising it for the contract price? I want to know what a great deal I'm getting on the house. He should be there, appraising just the property and telling me all that. And the answer is that if the agents have done their job very well, then that's one explanation as to why you might see appraisals come in at the contract price. But the other thing is we're there for the lender, certifying the value of their collateral and then looking for, health, safety, and structural issues that they might need to be flagged for. The buyer gets a copy of the appraisal typically, but it is for the lender and they are our client. And we have a duty of confidentiality towards them, which means we can't give out information freely to the buyer or the seller in the transaction.
So I always tell my clients to hold on to two things after the transaction besides, the contract documents. But one is their home inspection. So then when they go to relist, I'm like, go over it. There are things that you're going to have forgotten. Fix the little things that you didn't care about when you bought, and you're doing your property condition disclosure, because technically you know about those, even if you've forgotten. And then the other is the appraisal, because the square foot on the tax record is off so often. And if they haven't had a, otherwise I'm going to do a professional measurement to make sure that we're close. And I've seen enough houses, and I know you have too, that you can walk in and kind of go, I don't think this looks like that amount of square foot. How long have you been doing appraising?
I started my company in 2019, and I was a trainee for 2 years before that.
Okay. All right. You mentioned about the contract price. I had one-star review on Google back in 2016. And you know what it was about? 2016.
What was it
Appraisal
about?
gaps.
Oh.
I used an appraisal gap. I had used one on another client. We wanted concessions for closing costs with another. And the mother-in-law to be of the buyer, they were buying it together, but only the daughter-in-law to be was on the loan. She was a retired older realtor, and they had money, but they didn't want to use all their liquidity. And so the seller said, hey, we'll give you that. The price was like at 200,000 or something. And they said, we'll give you 200 and, we'll give you 6,000 in closing costs, because we had rolled the price up. They wouldn't go for 194 or whatever it would net them. So we went to 206, and they said, but you have to do an appraisal gap. And I'm like, okay, because I knew what those were. And this future mother-in-law went to another agent that she knew who was still in the business, and they between themselves decided that this was a self-serving clause that Jennifer had created, and they started doxing me on all the social media sites, on Facebook, on my Google page, everything else. That has since been removed. I did not remove it because she was so crazy that I was scared if I did anything, she'd start up again. And it was actually my clients and my kids' friends who saw, and they're like, hey, do you know what's being said about you? And they started jumping on, defending me. I didn't, they're like, Jennifer would never do anything self-serving. Then we roll around 4 years later, and everybody's using appraisal gaps, which brings me to one other thing I wanted to share. During COVID, I had people, because I play in the country. Oh, people from California are going to come in, and they're going to pay this amount of money for my house, and da-da-da-da-da. And I know I'm thinking of one in particular, and it was in Collioca, and I said, yeah, they probably will. But we can't stand up to an appraisal at that. The numbers, everything I'm seeing are not here. So I said, the smarter thing for you as the seller to do is price it. I'm going to use history major number, 625. We thought we could get 695. I said, price it at 625. Let them come in with the over ask. Let them come in with multiple offers. And I wasn't trying to demand into all multiple offers. I was pricing it as high and push a little of what I thought we could get for it. So really, probably 650, 175,000 difference. And sure enough, we got the price kind of where they think we got, like 680 or 685, but the appraisal came back at 650. And when I took the appraisal gap, I also said that the earnest money had to be enough to cover the gap. And that couldn't be a reason for the refund of the, we had to be through the other stuff first. Smart. I protected all their butts in it. And, I went round with Mrs. for a while trying to have her understand what I was saying.
You didn't get a 1-star review on that one, did you?
No. But I won't work with her again.
Not
smart. Because she wouldn't listen to me, but because it was a really hard transaction.
Yeah. Man, the appraisal gaps, that is a bygone era, I think.
Yeah. For the moment. Wait till
every
rates
single
drop.
thing.
When was that? Oh, that's right. Rates dropped.
Yeah.
Then it'll happen again. So we were also talking about things that we wanted to say. We had mentioned pre-recording, is there a difference between land appraisals and land with a house or something on it, or it doesn't matter if it's a barn or a barn dominium or a house or a manufactured or whatever. So tell us a little bit about that country stuff.
There is from an appraisal side, there's not that much difference. There is maybe a little less work that goes into a land appraisal because we don't have a house to measure. And if we're doing a property that has a house on it or has other buildings on it, we're probably measuring all of them. So in that regard, it might save us 30 or 45 minutes to avoid that work. But ultimately, they're the same thing. Most of the time, most appraisers are going to say you've got a property that has a house on it or whatever else. They're going to determine not only the value of the entire property as improved, we call it, but also just the land value. Because in appraising, the way we separate things out and some of the ways we test our conclusions is to get that land value and then see what that means the house, just the sticks and bricks is what we say. Just the sticks and bricks are worth. And do those things make sense together? And especially if we're doing a newer construction house, we will do the lenders want us to always use the sales comparison approach, which is where we just look at comps and see what are the comp tea leaves tell us the value is. But if it's a newer construction, we'll also do the cost approach, which is basically you take the figures from a national cost index and rebuild the house. And in that case, you definitely have to have the land value. So we're almost always doing a little bit of a land appraisal in every report, whether it's strictly land or not. And then for things that add value on top of the land, we mentioned that before we started recording. Anything that is built on the land and permanently attached to it becomes part of the real estate and therefore can be included in the appraisal valuation. Anything. By the way,
I think Mark's joining us. Hey, Mark, we started a little bit early because we didn't know how chatty we were going to be.
Yeah, sorry about that. Just trying to finish up on some coaching.
That's all right. So Clint was in the middle of telling us what adds value to your home and like what counts and doesn't count for when you're doing an appraisal.
Fantastic. Sorry for the interruption.
No problem.
So a pool does not.
A pool is a great example because you have in-ground pools, which are going to be pools that are dug out and put into the ground and therefore permanently attached to the land, and therefore they become real estate. But you also have above ground pools. And those are pools that just sit on top of the yard. Even if you build a deck around them, I guess, the deck can be permanently attached, and it sort of starts to become a gray area. But an above ground pool is typically not part of the real estate and excluded from the appraiser's opinion. So and then like the house I just had was a semi in ground. Semi would still be attached. Yeah.
All right. So play a fun game. Yes, no, or maybe. I'll name something. You tell me yes, no, or maybe. Fence.
What? Yeah. Yes is in value, or yes is it? Or
yes, it adds value. No, it does not add value, or maybe.
Oh, this is an easy game because the answer will always be maybe. But we'll say fence, yes, it's real estate, maybe adds value.
Roof, new roof.
New roof. In the most technical sense, it adds value. It may not, like if you had, it may not mean you tack on $8,000 to an otherwise equal price. But if you've got a roof that's shot, like it's got 2 years or less of useful life left, your buyer's probably going to want you to put a new roof on, and your appraiser can require you to put a new roof on. And so if you've done that beforehand, you've essentially avoided the expense of having to do it on the back. So it adds value.
I'm going to tell you that is one of the questions that realtors across the U.S. get asked the most. Mr. Seller just put on a $25,000 roof, and now he wants to have his house $25,000 higher. Like Wolf appliances versus, more mainstream.
Yeah. Again, if the whole house is, you're comparing two houses that are completely equal and one's got Wolf appliances and the other doesn't, maybe add some value. But it also might be a thing where a buyer walks through and goes, hey, that's nice. I'm glad they put that in there, but I'm not paying any extra for it. And we see that in a lot of different items in real estate, buyers' attitudes like that. Because, it's when someone does something for their own personal enjoyment, it doesn't always translate into value to the rest of the world.
Okay. What about if the house is in the path of a tornado that the 2 years in a row it's come through a tornado path? Is that looked at? Because flood is something that's accounted for.
Flood is definitely accounted for. There are other external influences that are accounted for. I'm not aware of any historical storm tracker like FEMA does with flood zones.
Yeah, me too. I hadn't either. I just wondered if you'd heard. All right, and this is the fun one. Playing in the country, this happens more than I think in the city. It happens with Airbnbs, but I'm talking in the country. The 60-inch zero turn that gets thrown in, the lawn equipment, the 2 kayaks. What do you do with those? Because I know what I tell my people, but I want to know if anything's changed in what you say.
They are all personal property, and they will be specifically excluded from the appraiser's opinion of value. Right. So I actually made a YouTube about this myself, because if you're an agent, your brokers will typically tell you, don't put any of that stuff in your sales contract. Take it and put it on a different agreement for personal property only. And that way, if you do that, you can put a value on it. If you put it in the contract, in the real estate contract, you have to give it zero value. Otherwise, the lenders get a little freaked out. The appraiser is going to say it has no value, or has to say it has no value, or is excluded from value. So
it literally
giving it away for free
contract at no additional cost to the buyer, which, and I always tell my people, we're going to talk about this after we talk about the inspection period, because I don't want someone getting bent out of shape over a cracked outlet plate and then like having a whole screaming match about something else. And I'm usually saying that I'm staying out of the majority of that as well, because I don't want to play those games. Let me see here. We were talking about basements, split levels, walkout basements, not walkout basements. That's another hairy one. Is that your house? Is that a house you had, Lance?
Yes. Let's talk about a split level with a room that was converted from a basement drive-in garage
on a beautiful mid-century modern.
How would you look at that, Clint?
That's really nice. You know, that split level looks like the bottom level there might not technically be basement. So
I promise you, it touches dirt on 3 sides.
It does touch dirt on 3 sides. Yes. Okay, well, then it's basement.
What do you mean?
Do I?
Definition of basement.
Tell us what you mean and why I'm poking fun at this.
Okay. So a couple years ago, it's been around longer than this, but back in 2022, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac formally said that all appraisers must use the ANSI guidelines for their measurements and for when we're measuring the property and reporting on the property. And what the ANSI guidelines say about basement is if any portion of any level is below grade, then the whole level is basement area. Okay. So much to the consternation of many people with split levels, they're notorious for having one corner of one wall below grade and the rest of it's above grade.
Like literally corner.
Literally can be one corner. Yeah. You could go out and dig it out with a shovel and transform your split level from basement home to non-basement home. But the ANSI guidelines say that it's now a basement home. Now, that's just a reporting requirement. It just means the appraiser has to call it a basement. It doesn't have anything to do with the value that we give it. So a basement is not, you've probably heard that a basement's 50% of the above grade value. That's not true. Basements can range from 20%, 10%, all the way to 100%. It all depends on the market, on what buyers are paying in that market for basement space. All around Nashville, we see them, every which way. So if you're in a more rural area, I'd say you're probably looking at a diminished value more often than not for basement space. But again, basements come in all shapes and sizes. They can be, I have seen them in a rural market where the house was built on the side of a hill. You had to drive up to the back of the house. The driveway went to the back of the house. And so when you walked in the back into the main level. But because of the topography in front of you, instead of being a grand staircase going up to the second floor, it was a grand staircase going down into what is technically basement. And that area had poured concrete walls. It had massive windows, a tremendous view. And functionally, it functioned just like the second level of a house would function. And so also because of the way this subdivision was built into this is kind of a hillside community, there were other comps that had houses just like that. And we could tell from looking at them that there was really no decrease in value for basement space. And it had a lot to do with that grand staircase and the way that space functioned naturally and fluidly with the rest of the house.
Yeah. Well, and that's something you said a couple of things that were important there. One was that finished to the same level as the upstairs. I did a video on that during COVID as well. Like, how do you know how is it finished? What's the ability for it? Is it, and from finish, is it block, or like I've seen ones that are literally earthen floor,
Mm-hmm.
But then too, we talked about tornadoes, and there are a lot of people asking for a basement.
That's right.
A lot of people coming from areas outside that are asking for a basement. I had a question earlier I wanted to ask when we were talking about that you were that the lender was who you were tied to, not the buyer or the seller.
Mm-hmm.
But before I ask it, we need to have a kind of a nutshell explanation of what an appraisal pool is. And Lance, I'm going to ask you to explain from the lender side why we have an appraisal pool, what it was in response to, and kind of how you order the appraisal, or like how we get from me and my buyer from Lance to Clint or somebody.
I'm glad you asked that, Jennifer. You're gonna ask the old salty graybeard, aren't you, to answer that?
Yep.
So what do I mean by that? See, Mark shaved all his off, and Clint, he's keeping his hidden.
I'm pretty gray.
There it is. So I've been doing this for 25 years, and when people ask me about my career, I joke about this, but it's also true. I used to be a subprime lender, and that's how you had to cut your teeth. You could not get into banking, you could not get into lending unless your dad owned a bank or something like that, unless you went through Washington Mutual, Cressley Bancorp, Option one of a million. What was the name you just threw out?
CIT. That's where my ex worked for a long time.
Yep. You had to cut your teeth, and luckily I cut my teeth in that, became a top producer, and got to go what we call the bigs. And I went to AmSouth and then on to Regions, and then on and on. But why did I bring that up? Because back in 2001, when I started doing
I was a young whippersnapper.
Yeah. I didn't have any gray 10 years ago. Anyway, we could really choose who we wanted to do the appraisal. And if we didn't like the appraisal, we could have somebody else do it. There also, there was a undertow in the industry. Like if the value wasn't there, somebody could call. It wasn't necessarily the loan officer. Someone in the company could call and say, hey, Clint, or whoever that person is, hey, we're going to need a little bit more value. I wasn't part of what I'm about to say, which is where, hey, I'm going to need a little bit more value. And, do you like Outback, or do you like, what do you like? And we'll take care of it. But by 2005, 2006, many of us in the industry knew an implosion. All of us in the industry knew what was coming. Every day we were looking over our shoulder going, the house of cards is about to fall apart. What did I mean about that? Appraisal every year, values were going up. The same crappy property we'd refinance 2 and 3 times. It sounds horrible, but the people would, hey, I ran up my debts again. I ran my credit cards up $40,000. But guess
Mark's like,
my property's going $100,000 worth more. Yeah. And
so now what do we do?
And finally, in 2007, when the House of Cards came down, there was a lot of reform. The HVCC, the Home Valuation Conduct Code, we had the Dodd-Frank Act that came forward that had made companies, I worked for a big bank called Regions at the time. It made big companies, Clint and I were talking about this a minute ago, set up boards, AMCs, appraisal management companies. And appraisal management companies would now be responsible for the content of the appraisals. And I, the loan officer, although I could say I needed an appraisal, I couldn't specifically pick who was going to do that. And so we would set up boards of people. We'll say 10. So if you're a large company like Regions in a certain area, you'd have 10 people that you vetted. You checked how they performed against the HVCC. Clint can probably help me with this. There's probably a rating system. Certainly, if you look at errors and omissions, you could look and see who had been, I don't even know if the word's allowed. Blacklisted used to be the word that they used for that. There are people that weren't allowed to appraise. And that was, for years, that was an interesting list of people going on and off of it. But the AMC was to manage, their job was to manage all of these different appraisers, and they would, in theory, order the appraisals randomly. So Clint would be on this board of maybe 10, and there'd be a website maybe he could go to, or maybe the AMC would call him and say, hey, can you run out to Chapel Hill Tuesday? It's a rush. He's like, I can't do it. I'm booked. So they go to the next person. So then the AMC started to manage that, Jennifer, and they were responsible for auditing, editing, making sure it was done correctly before it was given to the lender. That's a little bit of a 50,000-foot view. Clint can probably tell us a little bit more about that, and probably some of the pressures of being AMCs are a powerful force.
Yeah, AMCs are. They came out of some well-intentioned legislation, but as legislation often does, it can't foresee the future and the way it could go bad. And right now there is, I guess, some new oversight. They're looking at new oversight into AMCs because the AMCs figured out that there's no restrictions on how much of the appraisal fee they can take, and whether or not that the AMC's portion of the fee is disclosed has been left up to the states. So in Tennessee, I'm pretty sure we're a non-disclosure state. So if you go to get your
some great sunshine for our sunshine laws.
What's that?
That's great sunshine for our sunshine laws.
Yeah. I should say we are a disclosure state because that's really public record. Like what you pay for your house in Tennessee is public record. So we're a disclosure state. But as far as AMC fees go, it does not have to be disclosed, which is sort of right now being held up in sharp contrast to the level of disclosure and transparency that agents have to provide and lenders have to provide, and everyone else in the transaction has to provide tremendous amount of disclosure and transparency, but the AMCs are invisible. So you go to Lance to get your loan. Lance says, okay, your appraisal fee is going to be $600.
That was my secondary question from Pools is what are the fees and who sets them?
The appraiser ultimately sets their fees, but in the lending industry, the lenders a lot of times are telling the buyers what the normal fees are they're seeing, or I guess sometimes maybe all that the bank is willing to pay. And then I think there are some other like TRID. I don't know about all this stuff, but TRID, I know about TRID, which is if the lender discloses the fee, it can't change from that really without certain conditions. But when the lender will disclose that $600 appraisal fee, the buyer thinks they're paying $600 for an appraisal. But what happens next is it goes to the AMC. The AMC says, well, we know that things are pretty slow, so we think we can take 60% of this for ourselves and still get some, starving appraiser to do it for 40%. So they take, I'm an English major, so I can't do the math, the 40% math, 60% math on 600. But they take a gigantic chunk of that fee, pay the appraiser beans, and the buyer only sees that they're paying $600 for an appraisal. And what's happening now is the lenders and buyers are starting to get low quality products because when all the AMCs want are fast turn times and low fees, we all know in our economy, the way things are set up, that you get a product that meets those conditions. So AMCs they served a purpose when they were started out. They're sort of getting a little bit crossways with the government, with everybody right now. And so, I have a love-hate relationship with them.
Yeah, makes sense. Let me see. I'm going to look over some of our questions. What's my house worth? How long have you been an appraiser? Appraisal gaps. Oh, you said that you're not a VA appraiser, but you know some about them. And I have always maintained that there is not a lot of difference on appraisal requirements between VA and USDA. So can you tell us, just real quick, what an appraisal requirement is? I always say handrail over above a certain number of risers, no drop without this, no peeling paint, no evidence of water intrusion. Those are the ones that pop the most. Windows that open, because I do historic homes, windows that open and allow egress. But there's not a lot of difference between a VA and an FHA and USDA. I actually left one of our local associations because I got so angry in a training for new agents over some things that were being said about VA loans.
Yeah.
But Jennifer, without telling the name of the organization, what were some of the things they were saying?
They were saying that they were that the agents should not, when they had a listing, really accept a VA loan because they were really hard to get appraisals done. You're going to have a ton of repairs. They had no skin in the game. At which point I went on my rant that the veterans, and I'm going to try and edit my military adjectives, but the veterans' skin in the game is their willingness to go out and put their butt on the line for you. Hence Memorial Day. I will try and stop my rant, but yes.
Gosh, it sounds like one of those sunshine words, steering.
Yeah. Well, and the other part of it is
the VA offer.
Yeah,
Anyway,
Now I will say VA loans stick. Do they stick with the house or do they stick with the veteran on that house?
Lance, that might be a question for Lance.
It depends. I mean,
I think
there's
it's
a
the
misconception
veteran.
out there about assumable loans, and that a veteran can put their house up for sale and someone can assume the loan on they go with their life. That's not the case. That loan still.
No, I
stays
meant the low appraisal. Like if the home, because remember we had one that they had done a refi
With the
on
house,
in
good
October
call.
and we couldn't sell it till April.
Yeah.
So
So
it's
when
the
you
house and the veteran.
when you do a VA appraisal, you order a VA case number, and that appraisal is attached to that house. So if anyone else buys it with a VA loan, that is the appraisal that will be used.
For 180 days.
Yes.
And
6
a
months.
FHA is 90 days because we just went through that with my daughter's house that we had to rewrite the contract because it was a flip and for
Anti-flipping.
reasons unknown to God, man, I didn't put together the math on the date that the sellers bought it and then sold it.
That is actually two different things. The 90-day things, the 90-day rule is the flip rule. So you can't sell it twice within 90 days and do FHA financing on the back end. The FHA appraisal, unless they've changed it, sticks with the property for 6 months.
So both VA and FHA are 6 months. Okay, I've learned something nice. I like to hear that. And then we talked about land appraisal. We talked about basements. What do we do when the appraiser, Clint, I'm sorry, you're a complete idiot. You used comps that were rentals in the area, in the neighborhood. I had one neighborhood that was being held down for months because appraisers were using this house that had been flipped and it looked beautiful, but everybody in the neighborhood knew that it had been used as a group home situation and that the whole house smelled like urine. The other one that I've had is when the square foot, legitimately, when they bought the house, they didn't know the square foot. And I'm like, oh no, you're right. This is this dollar per square foot. And we were way less, even though you don't use dollar per square foot. That's how us ignorant realtors translate it. But does it make you grumpy if we send you and say, hey, could you look at these comps?
No, it doesn't. Well, it doesn't make me grumpy because I'm an agent and an appraiser. But I'll tell you, if the appraiser comes in low on their value, it's really probably the agent's fault, not the appraiser's fault.
The list agent or the buyer's agent or both?
The listing agent. Not really, but it's a group. It is a group responsibility. Okay. Yeah. So one of the big sticking points here, and this goes back to like the beginning of what I was saying, the appraiser is working for the lender. Okay. And we are there to come to an opinion of market value. And market value has a very specific definition. And part of the definition of market value is that it is the most probable price. So we get sideways with agents on this issue because agents don't need to do market value. We don't care about probable price. We care about potential price because we want to get our clients the most they can get for the property. Now that's supposed to be balanced out by a buyer who is looking out for their own best interest and a buyer's agent who's trying to drag that price down. But market conditions don't always allow that, like we saw during COVID. So you can see we got two parties that are kind of there going at this value with different definitions and under different parameters. So that's one way we get crossed. But in the situation where I've come in low, I only get aggravated because here's your new statistic. I would estimate that about 5% of agents bother to interact with me before I turn in my report. And that number is abysmal. I, as an agent and appraiser, ever since I became a trainee, and I was doing a lot of transactions while I was a trainee, there is not one single transaction where I would ever, under any circumstances, let an appraiser go appraise my property without hearing from me and having input from me as part of that transaction.
Yeah.
Whether I'm the listing agent or the buyer's agent, they're hearing from me. Because not just because I'm an appraiser, but because I know that person who's going to the property is just a human. And I know how fast they're moving. I know what their workload looks like and how easy it is to get complacent. And that by virtue of their objectivity, which is the whole purpose they exist, is to not care about this transaction. They need input from somebody who does. So
I should walk in with my stack of details about why
you should bust in. You should bust the door down and go in there while they're there, Jennifer. Tell them what you do. Tell them how you hide in the closet.
Agents interact, because this is a big thing.
Yeah,
I can tell you what I do, but I want to hear what you would like as an appraiser for how you would like the interaction to occur if it's a buyer's agent and a seller's agent, because we do have agents who watch this podcast too.
Yeah. What I want is for your agent to bust in there in the most delicate way possible first, because it is very possible that you're dealing with an appraiser who is sensitive to having their opinion of value influenced, and that's a big no-no.
Right.
Nobody's allowed to influence the appraiser's opinion of value. If that happens, the appraiser has to cancel the assignment, basically. And
I can't go, hey, Clint, can we get this?
that would rise to the level of a bribe, I think.
What would she have to do?
So influencing an appraiser's opinion of value is pretty narrowly defined as bribing them, like Jennifer just tried to do to me, or telling them the number that you want them to hit, which is ironic since in a lender transaction, they have the contract price. They know the number everybody wants them to hit, but we have to ignore that. So you can't tell them the value that you want, and you can't bribe them. There are other ways you could influence them. You could threaten their lives. It gets a little bit, there are other things to do. But that's pretty much it. So I argue that appraisers should not have a problem receiving information from any agent or any party in the transaction as long as it's done appropriately. But many of them do. So in that first interaction with them, the way I do it is if I'm, let's say I'm the listing agent because it's the easiest, they're going to contact me to get into the house. Mm-hmm. So I've immediately got their attention right then. And that's when I say, hey, by the way, can I send you an email with comps that we used? Don't call them comps if you can help it. That was my mistake. Call them sales. With the sales that we used to price the property. And also the information, the upgrades that my clients have done and everything they've spent on it. I give them the numbers that they've spent on it if that's available to me. I want them to just have all the information that I could possibly give them, because if they're complacent or just moving fast or having a bad day, that's the stuff that they'll miss. Or they'll say, well, I don't feel like I have to call the agent on this one. I feel like I got a pretty good sense of it. And maybe they miss something that would otherwise be important to them. Mm-hmm. Providing them my sales that I looked at. This is a great example of the one time I ever changed my value. When we're doing an appraisal, we define our market boundaries. So like we stop our search based on different highways or school zones or other things. Okay. Mm-hmm. And as long as we've got enough data in that search parameters, we have no reason to look further because we've already got plenty of data in our best search area. So I was doing this assignment and I came in low. I had plenty of sales in my search area, and they did a reconsideration of value, and they sent me a great sale that was one street away from where I stopped my search. And so I was like, well, it makes sense that I didn't see it because I had 20 sales to look at in my search area, but this is inarguably a terrific close sale. I put it in, I raised my value, and that was great. That was a great win. Usually that doesn't happen. Usually the agents send me sales that are already in my report, which does make me mad. And, or they send me nonsense sales that just have a high price per square foot. Yeah.
The only time that I've gone and said, yeah, hey, we need to look at this is when the square foot was considerably different. I said, hey, we can't really fight this one. I see where they're coming from on this. But I called the appraiser and I had a long discussion about the square foot because these were the first time sellers of the home, and the builder literally missed, I think it was 100 square foot. When you're talking, that multiplies out. The other one that I did is there was a neighborhood, let's just call it Smithtown. And then there was a Smithtown West. Smithtown was high-end construction, custom builds, lots of details prior to the 08 crash. After things started going again, a track builder bought and the rest of the land that had all going to been big original Smithtown, and they did Smithtown West, and it was a custom builder that had 3 tiers of building, and this was their lowest tier. And I said, these have the same name, but if you're not from this area, they look nice, but they're very different construction. So I asked them if they would consider homes in 2 other very abutting that neighborhood that were custom builds. I said, could you look at these because you've gone outside of the neighborhood, even though they have the same root name. When I have an appraiser talk to me, I come out and I always want to know where all they go, because when I say I play in the country, and sometimes somebody's like, I need an appraiser down here in the West 40. And then I ask them what they're seeing in the business to help me be a better agent in the pricing of my listings. But as a buyer's agent, I don't always know who the appraiser is and where they are until it comes back. So how do I even, as a buyer's agent, get that interaction done?
Yeah. I tell the listing agent, I just tell them flat out, hey, when the appraiser schedules the inspection with you, I need to know, and I need their contact information, please. Because I'll roll the dice. I know they're
50% of the time they give it to you.
Yeah. I don't ever have a problem getting it from my cooperating agent.
If they're cooperating, 50% of the time you'll get it. I'm just teasing. Yeah. So that brings up one of the next questions. What are you seeing? Well, before I do this, I'm going to ask what are you seeing next? Lance, tell us a little bit, and Clint, chime in about appraisal waivers when you're not we don't need one on this. And I'm not talking about where you're putting down 60 or 70% of the value, but we see some where it's in the 20 or 30% that somebody's putting down. We get an appraisal waiver. So why are those kinds of things happening? Is it because we're moving from a neutral to a buyer's market, or what?
No, a lot of it has to do with Fannie and Freddie and some rules coming down from on high. And they want to make consumers consider the appraisal process to be a headache and hard and something they don't understand. And that makes sense given some of the things Clint's told us. This is some of the little insights he gave us. They want it to be a better experience for the consumer. And so they've added things like if you have a high, this is funny because it's kind of contrary to other things they tell us from on high. They want to, if you have a lot of assets, suddenly things can work a little bit better for you. Depending what your zip code is. I thought you.
Are we drawing red lines around these zip codes?
I'm laughing. I'm not trying to change the subject, but I don't know that Clint will see them, but he might get what's called a limited review appraisal, or he might get what we call a what's the one where you do a sketch for us?
A hybrid or a property data collection.
Yeah, there's some others, Jennifer, you probably haven't come into with me. There's several different variations that Clint can tell us about. That in many cases take just as much work, less photographs. So, and he gets paid less. I bet he'll tell us, and it's stressful.
Yeah. I don't personally do those hybrid ones or the property data collection. I've seen a few orders come across, but the fees don't make sense for me to spend my time on it. And I don't know, the property data collection for the hybrids in particular, Fairway this may not be happening at Fairway, but the people that have been hired to do property data collection have been of questionable background checking, like literally Uber drivers or whoever will sign up to go do it for $50. And that's not disclosed to the people whose house they're going in. I think the presumption is it's an appraiser or a realtor. And that's a problem. And again, that's just, there's a lot of, the AMCs didn't get a lot of regulation put on them back when they were created. And so it's really coming to a head right now. if somebody gets a waiver, I don't know about it. What I see, and we saw a lot of this back in 2022, right before interest rates skyrocketed, Fannie shifted to a lot more waivers and a lot more automated valuations.
Yeah.
They've got their own fancy Zestimate that they use to figure out the value. And then they couple that with the borrower's credit score. And if they feel comfortable, they waive the appraisal, or they use the AVM, I guess. So that really cut down our business back then when they instituted that. I think a lot of that has gone away because right now the market is really changing a lot and not in a good way. And so they want the humans back in there telling them what to think about these properties. And that's great. I mean, that's what we're for. But, it engenders some bitterness in the appraisal community. That's like, oh, you don't want us when things are good. You just want us when things are bad.
More questions I want to ask too, and you guys chime in if you have one. But I'm going to tell you what they are so you can budget time and all that. First is, with the changes in the market, are a lot of appraisers coming out of the business the way a lot of mortgage lenders was. And I read a stat the other day that between, I think it was February of 23 and June of 23, 19% of agents left in AR. Now they might have just become real estate agents rather than realtors. So that's one question. The second is, if you were selling a house or advising a seller, would you do a pre-listing appraisal, and in what situations? And then when you say they're not supposed to know the value of the house, but when they have the contract, they do. A lot of times when people are asking me, hey, Jen, can you give me an idea of what my house is worth? And I'm always like, well, someone's going to pay for it. But my second question is always, what are you needing the value for? Because if it's a refi or a HELOC or a sale, I'm pricing it different in that range, which could be 25 to 50,000 in some price points. And then the last question I had for you is, what are you seeing? And we'll definitely have to have you on again, because I know you said there are some big changes coming and there's no way we can get into all that. But what are some of the answers to those questions? And I can run them down one at a time if you need.
Yeah, I think the first one was, what's the market doing right now? Oh, no, how many appraisers are getting out? I'm not sure how many appraisers have gotten out, but I know that some of the older ones are. With this new form that's coming in from Fannie Mae, it's going to require a lot more data collection during the inspection. A lot of appraisers are choosing to let that be their cue to exit.
Okay. And that's a thing that we as agents need to know. Like, one of my questions when I'm writing an offer is, Lance, how quickly can we get this closed? And like in 2016 and 17, appraisals in Spring Hill were out 6 weeks. So you were not getting 30-day contracts. But right now, Lance, we could probably do, if we needed to, a 15 or a 20.
I did 10 a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah. Okay. So then, yeah. So would you ever what do you think about pre-listing appraisals? Because sometimes people are like, well, I appraised this and I'm selling it under appraised value. And the next appraiser came in and said it was only worth, 10,000 less than that.
They said it was worth what the contract said.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that a pre-listing appraisal is a good idea when you've got a property with really any sort of complexity. So if you've got a basement, if you've got an in-ground pool, if you've got some acreage, things like that. Maybe it's a log cabin and there's not very many log cabin comps.
Or just hasn't sold in the area lately.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, no sales in the near history. Those can be great indications that an appraisal might be valuable to you. An appraisal might be pointless if you have a seller who wants their price and won't listen to anybody else, and nothing's going to change their mind. Why get an appraisal?
That is not my seller ever. Go find somebody.
Now, we have been doing a lot of pre-listing appraisals because a lot of sellers' minds are stuck in 2022, and a lot of their agents are in 2025, and they can't agree on a price. And so they're calling us to come give their seller a reality check, which we're happy to do.
Yeah. Okay. And then what about the range for refi HELOC versus listing it on the market?
That's a great question because it goes into seeing the contract. The appraiser is not going to be influenced by the contract price, by seeing the contract price. They shouldn't be. But at the same time, it is a relevant data point. So you've got an arm's length transaction. You've got a buyer and their agent who are representing their own best interests, and they, for some reason, agreed to pay this price. And so it's a relevant data point in that appraisal. For a HELOC or a refi, you don't have that data point. You are simply looking at a bunch of closed sales, and they say what they say.
Okay, the sub question on that. You have access to the MLS and the private remarks, right?
Yes.
If somebody is selling a house and it's an estate sale or in a divorce or a group home, should they modify that right before close so that the appraisal knows what? Because I had another situation recently where there were 2 homes, and I'm like, what? I called the agent when I was trying to figure out comps. I said, why are these homes so low? One was a divorce situation, and the other, it wasn't an estate sale, but it was a situation where the spouse had died and the wife was like, that's enough money for me to take. They didn't even want to counter. So those are important things for agents to please do your job and update.
Yeah. Put that in the private remarks.
After everything's said and done, you don't want to
before you close it out. Put those things in the private remarks if there are unknown things that or unobvious things that influence the value. And if you're an agent who's an expert in your market, that's the other thing that you need to be in your appraiser's face before their inspection, saying, "Okay, here's all the comps, but I need you to know some little details like this one smelled like dog, and this one was a divorce, and none of this stuff is advertised, but this is what was going on."
And the same thing if it's a positive. Like this was next door to the buyer's grandma's house, and she's taking care of them.
Yeah.
All right, we're closing in on an hour, Jennifer. We're gonna have to have this guy back, but I've got to say something really funny. I'm gonna watch y'all's reactions. So Clint, one of the unexpected when you came on our podcast, did you watch any other podcasts of ours before you did this?
I haven't, no.
So you don't know if we're going to pull something out on here, or if we're going to, totally bring something out. But we don't have to, and that's why I've been laughing through most of our thing today, because we've all said some pretty funny things. It is clear that Jennifer Weithman takes her career very serious. It's one of the reasons I'm very blessed to work with her. This is a woman that reads the buyer's notes. She is the person that reads the footnotes, and it doesn't just because maybe something bad happened to her. It's because she is very detail oriented. I am not. I wouldn't even know where to find a buyer's note if it bit me on my nose.
I can be scatty.
That being said, guess what is part of our podcast, Clint, that is amazing that we never know what it's going to do? Does anyone want to throw that out? Mark?
No, I'm not even going to guess.
What kind of suggestions are we going to get? AI. And what does that AI do, Jennifer?
So the AI
looks for little snippets in this podcast of great things.
Yes.
And all of us have said funny things today that I can't wait to see if it shows up in the AI. But don't worry, Clint. We can edit that before it goes to press.
Okay.
Are there things that we have to edit out? I know there are sometimes that I watched my mouth. I didn't do any military adjectives.
It's funny. It'll pick things up like, I'm not even going to repeat it, but there's just funny things that we all just said in past that are just funny colloquialisms that we said that the AI picks up as some sort of matter of fact thing, and it'll actually give us a snippet. So you'll see later. We record this the week before, and then we broadcast. The people will be seeing this actually next week. I think it'll be June 2nd. Will be the day that they'll be seeing this. June 3rd. I can't
believe we're halfway through this year.
Yep. And well, it's funny, Mark. Clint, we'll send you a few of the little snippets it comes up with because it's pretty darn funny.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'd love to see.
It'll be even more funny if one's from Mark because he said nothing this whole time. So
exactly. I'm just ahead.
That's what it'll say. If you're just ahead, says Mark Fraser.
It'll be like how to get ahead with
us. It will. It'll say that.
Yes.
So hey, what a great call. We'll have to have you back, Clint. It's nice, Jennifer. Good job to bring someone who is an appraiser and a realtor. A little bit of a two-trick pony, so to speak. So
I appreciate you having me on. It's great.
For sure. Don't hang up once we hit end recording. I'll edit this part off. Once you hit end recording, don't leave the screen until it says your little section is complete on the bottom right side.
Okay.
All right. So we'll end it right now. Great.